Talking to Death is released every Friday and brought to you absolutely free. But if you want ad-free listening and exclusive bonuses, subscribe to Tenderfoot Plus at tenderfootplus.com or on Apple Podcasts.
Talking to Death is a production of TenderfootTV and iHeart Podcasts. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back. This is Talking to Death. I'm your host, Payne Lindsey. In today's intro, we're going to unpack the most recent episode of Up and Vanished, episode 6, called Two Truths and a Lie. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't listened to this episode yet, unless you want to ruin it for yourself, I would just press pause and go listen to episode 6 right now. This is a pre-recorded conversation that I had with some of the Up and Vanished producers who were all investigating this on the road with me in Alaska. And they were there in the bar when I met with Oregon John in person, and we had our conversation. And here's how it went. So we quickly conjure up plan B, and we immediately hop on another flight, and we've already been on 3 flights at this point. And this day was gloomy, to say the least. It was windy, it was cold, it was raining, and it was just completely uncomfortable moving around. And we're touching down in Ketchikan, and I've been communicating with Oregon John pretty much every 15, 30 minutes that day. And I decided to tell him that I was going to be landing a little bit later than we really were. One, because he had offered to pick me up from the airport, and we weren't going to do that. And I didn't want him to be around there or see when I landed if I gave him the honest answer. And I also wanted to go find a place that we could be at and potentially talk to him that we've already scouted out, that is quiet enough, that doesn't have some DJ karaoke night going on, and that we felt was a safe place to talk to him. And so when we touched down, we immediately checked into the Airbnb, and within that hour, we were suiting up and pulling out our equipment. And I guess Dylan and Mike kind of talked to me about next steps after we landed.
It was a long way to get to even Ketchikan itself from the airport, right? Like, it was a long flight, but then you had to get on a ferry, go across the water to actually get to the town. We didn't know anything. There was no Uber. We had to call taxis. One taxi wasn't enough for both of us in all of our cases. So we had to call a second taxi, and it ended up being the same taxi that took you guys to the place we were going. And then, yeah, it was a bit of a scramble to get everything together. But I think, we've done this enough that it wasn't terrible to get it together. I will say that I'm not super jealous of Cooper being from Alaska. I'm pretty thankful he's from Alaska. So he was the one who was right next to you, talking to him. And I got to kind of stand back a little bit with Dylan. And I know Cooper's also had his moments, like in season 3 when he was when he was in the car while you were talking to V-Dog.
Yeah, if you remember season 3, when I met, his nickname was V-Dog. It was Cooper and I that flew out there to Great Falls, Montana, and then drove about another hour outside of that town and just popped up on him, knocked on his door. And that was a spooky moment because when we finally got to the property, we had like a general address, but we didn't know what the house looked like. There's no Google Maps. There's no, street view. And it was literally up this big, huge hill that was bumpy. And thank God we're in an SUV. And the first thing that comes through our minds is that there's no quick escaping of this place. You're going to have to go 6 miles an hour down this hill to leave. But if you remember season 3, when I talked to this guy named V-Dog, it was a very brief conversation. He didn't have much to say, but I don't think he made himself look very good either. And actually, since then, he's been arrested by the FBI on other charges, but clearly they've been keeping an eye on him. But yeah, so Cooper's been in situations like that before, where it's nerve-wracking. And I think that my main goal was to sort of pad my existence there one-on-one, face-to-face with John as much as I possibly could. And even down to just the subtleties of two people talking and us looking back and forth So I can even get a chance to look at him at all and reset and think of a question. Because you have to remember, when we went into this, we were going under the guise of being interested in this job that he has. And we couldn't just jump right to Nome, Alaska and dig into the details of a missing persons case without looking super suspicious unless we really slowly worked our way there. And fortunate enough for us, he was pretty open, and he just started talking about his past, and it wasn't very long before Nome, Alaska came up on its own organically. And Cooper and I had talked beforehand that if he brings it up, we need to say we've been there before and create a conversation about that. And once we started talking about Nome, Alaska, and we got into Flo's disappearance and why he left there, that's really when he said some of the biggest and most important things I think he said in that conversation. And I kind of want to just unpack some of those. When we were all there in the moment, it's kind of hard to completely digest it as you're hearing it, because I'm simultaneously focused on making sure I don't blow this somehow. And when he said stuff like, there's a podcast, about this case, and there's a podcaster, in that moment, I legitimately thought, well, jig's up, right? And I either show that on my face or we double down right now. And I just doubled down and tried to ask more questions about it and played stupid. But to me, personally, he offered up a lot of information and detail that I'd never heard of before. And if anything, it makes him, in a more solid way, the last person to be with her. And not only just with her, but in his own words, with her all night. And we can play a clip of that.
And yeah, she passed out, and then in the morning I woke up and she was gone, but left her shoes and her phone.
He mentions that they went to sleep, and when he woke up in the morning, she was gone. He also mentioned that she wanted a place to sleep it off, which, based on your interpretation of that, either she was really tired, or one could speculate that she was inebriated, right? We've all been through this tape. We were all there when we heard it the first time. But from you guys, what are your biggest takeaways from some of the statements that Oregon John made in that bar?
Well, I think, for one, him basically stating exactly what was left in his tent the morning after, when she supposedly left his tent. I think that's important, because that whole thing was a little sketchy for me, how we even learned about, or how the family even learned about how he had the items, how he returned the items to Blair, Florence's sister. And just that whole story seemed very strange to me. Like, why was there not much follow-up here? He just gave these items over to somebody when they came and questioned him because somebody saw her, or there was rumor that she went back to his tent, went to West Beach, and he's just handing over her items in the morning. And it's like, I would love to just see that exchange and see him hand over these belongings of somebody who is never going to show up again. Maybe nobody knew that at the time. Obviously, no one expected that at the time. But like, what was he like in that moment? And I've always, we've heard the tape of people saying that he handed over these items, but now we have him saying it specifically and what the items are. And that's unprompted. He just said that out of nowhere. Like, yeah, we were talking about Nome, or you guys were talking about Nome or Florence and the missing girl, or however it was phrased, but he brought this up. He brought up what was handed over to whoever. And I just thought that was very interesting. I mean, that's like hard evidence of, okay, he also has said in the tape, because people think I'm the last one to see her, right? Okay. And then you're also handing over her belongings, the last belongings we can find that were on her that night.
Well, he literally says, because I was the last person to see her alive, besides the person who killed her.
Right. And I thought he said it twice.
He does say it twice.
He says it another time where he says, like, they think Or maybe he's talking about they think I did it. They think I'm the one who did it when he said he couldn't return to the town. I might be mixing those up. But yeah, that's super interesting that he's saying he was the last one to see her, but then like, I don't know, she just left in the middle of the night when I was sleeping. It's like, then maybe you weren't the last one to see her. What are you talking about? How do you know that for sure, that you were the last one to see her? That's a strange thing to say.
He apparently also knows that the last person she was with is the person who killed her, and she was put in this barrel under a meth dealer's house. But the way that he describes who this person may be, who she was last with, who killed her, kind of changes and shifts a little bit throughout our conversation. And we can play some clips of that too.
They found her buried under the dude's house, the meth dealer, who was also the search and rescue diver for the police. I was the last person to see her alive, besides the guy that killed her. And a girl come and hung out in my tent one night, and she walked off somewhere, and somebody kidnapped her and murdered her.
So the guy who fucking really did it, did he get caught, or did you fucking anyway? Good.
But I still got family members calling me.
Yeah.
They actually were doing a podcast and tried to get a hold of me.
He mentioned something about a search and rescue guy, and then he mentioned something about this meth dealer.
Did you know that dude who did it? Did you grab the
No,
fuck
never met him. He was friends with her meth dealer. They conspired together. That's the thing is up there is why would you need to kill a girl? They put out like crazy.
Then he brings up at one point that the Nome police are corrupt and they're the ones who are also in on it. And he starts describing for a second about how a Nome police officer raped and killed somebody before.
Nome is corrupt. You have no idea. 3 times in the last 12 years, the law enforcement department has been shut down and taken over by the feds. They are so corrupt up there, dude. It's crazy.
So like,
one of the police officers was raping and murdering all the girls in town.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
And he was basically loosely describing the murder of Sonia Ivanov from 2 decades ago that we had briefly touched on earlier in the season.
Yeah, which is super weird to me because it's like, it didn't seem like he was unclear or hazy about what happened that night. It kind of seemed like he had a really good memory of what was going on that night and what, that whole time period. He seems to remember pretty well. And then certain things like that, where he's like tricking in Matthew Owens, the known police officer who did murder someone like 17 or 20 years ago before that. You can almost take that as he's possibly muddying the waters there. Like, what is he doing? Why is he suddenly not remembering these facts? And I know you might not remember every fact of everything, but like who did it and where they found the body is like a very important thing you wouldn't remember wrong. That's a strange thing to remember wrong, but you remember what items you handed over to the people looking for her, and you remember her leaving, and you remember the night before, but you vaguely remember how it ended. Like, that doesn't seem... You're going to remember if there was a whole search and they found a barrel under somebody's house. That's going to stick in, but he seemed very non-committal to those details. But he was saying them openly again.
He's also the only person who's saying anything remotely similar to that besides Kelly, which is the pseudonym we gave her, who is also the person that he presents in our conversation as somebody who would vouch for him, who even told the FBI that, hey, it wasn't me who did it, it was this guy over here. And if you look at her text messages that we read, they kind of, you could draw connections in her super vague theory. But the big difference is that John's claiming that her body was found and that Kelly took this to the FBI, meaning that it's a wrap. It's all over. This is a solved case. And I even mentioned that towards the end of our conversation, kind of like, why he was talking about going back to Nome. And if he went back to Nome, everyone would know who he was, and people were still reaching out to him. And I was like, why? And they're because they think I'm involved. And I said, but they caught the guy, didn't they? And he just responded that, well, they still think that I'm involved. And so to me, it was just a very specific statement. It was very detailed. I mean, it's not like where did he pull that from? In a barrel under someone's house. That isn't true.
Right, a friend of mine, she actually called the FBI in because she was working for the guy that killed her, and she found the barrel under the house and called the FBI in. The FBI had to rescue me. Under the dude's house, buried in a 50-gallon drum, that girl is telling you about.
I mean, and if it is true, then they never found her, right? Or we haven't found her yet. Today's guest is a good friend of mine. She's an amazing podcaster, amazing writer. She hosts a podcast called The Fall Line, where she investigates overlooked cold cases in the southeast region of the U.S. Her podcast highlights marginalized victims and seeks justice in cases that are often just overlooked and underreported throughout history. She's also into weird shit like UFOs and cryptids and stuff like that, and I'm a huge fan of her other podcast called One Strange Thing. She came to the studio here in Atlanta, and we had a really fun chat about what it's like to be a podcaster in 2024, true crime in general, and just our perspectives on this evolving genre that can be really good and really bad. And we kind of unpacked some of our feelings about that and some of our differences in how we do things and how we both feel that they're equally as valuable and important. So without further ado, today's guest is Laurah Norton.
I think we operate in two completely opposite worlds, and I appreciate both of them. You tell me if you think I'm right.
Okay.
Like, I do tons of archival research, right? Because the way that the stuff that we do, we start usually, and you probably start like this too. We start with a story where there's like almost nothing available. Okay. I mean, sometimes we start with like a immigration record that's like the bottom's torn off of it.
Wow.
And then we start
so
from
literally
there.
nothing.
Yeah, literally nothing.
Go off of.
An obituary, that's it. A family comes to us and they say, like, can you try and get the police records? I actually have pretty good luck with law enforcement. They may also, like we said, be a little bit of a difference. Just depends. I work a lot with, and you also work with experts too. I work a lot with scientists, but you do a lot of work out in the field. We do that sometimes. But I do a lot of work on the back end, and I think you do a lot of investigation, like out in the field. So it's very different. Like it's very much a documentary field. And I think we do a lot of everything on the front end and then sort of present our findings. So I think that's kind of the different feel of it. I really like listening to what you're doing right now on season 4. Like I told you when I got here, it's stressing me out really badly.
What's the last thing you heard?
You getting ready to go meet someone that I didn't feel like I wanted you to go meet in a bar with your friend, someone who had enough ammo and money that it cost $1 a round, and they were shooting it. And I was just like, I was feeling the need to send you a little quick text message to tell you not to do it. But I mean, I know you're sitting here alive now, so I guess it worked out. But
I made it out alive.
I just, it's such a different world. And I can totally understand why you need to do that because my methods for that particular case, I don't really see them working. I mean, we certainly track people on social media and find them and try and set up interviews, but I can't really see myself sitting down with the man you were speaking to. Your audience knows him, I think, as Oregon John, right? I can't see myself shooting him a Zoom link.
Right.
And saying, I'll send you.
I don't think he'd accept that.
I'll send you the transcript to review afterwards.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to play ball with that.
So it's just a really different kind of world. It's just interesting to hear how differently all of us who do, this kind of work that has a lot of depth to it, just approach subjects differently. I don't know.
Yeah. Because there's like a general bucket you can put all of us in of true crime podcasts.
Yeah.
But that means a lot of different things today than it did, once upon a time when podcasts were first kind of emerging and this kind of storytelling in general, right? But yeah, there's so many different ways to do it. And I think that what you're really good at is finding those missing pieces through archive and records and, being able to kind of piece together lost history or something in a way. Or how do you look at it?
I look at it a lot as we research a lot of times around things. So when you go to something and there's nothing available, like a lot of podcasters who do excellent work aggregate research, right? So they find stuff and they put together a good story based on what's available. And families or unidentified persons, which I work on a lot, if there's not stuff available on that, a lot of folks will say, well, I want to cover this case, but I can't. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, we'll cover this case because we can produce primary research on it, like what you do, but differently. So we go out and we say, okay, well, this person was found. They're unidentified.
Let's talk about that for a second. Like, what is an unidentified person?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm just dropping in.
But like, for someone who might not know what you mean by that specifically, what's an unidentified person?
Yeah, like a John or Jane Doe.
Okay.
So like our mutual friend Todd Matthews, who passed away recently.
Yes. I'm so sad about that.
Me too. It was a big shock. He had just finished his big project that was coming out with iHeart.
R.I.P. Todd Matthews. Amazing human, hilarious, just a bright individual who I was lucky enough to sit down with a few times. He was featured on our Dead and Gone podcast. And
was he?
Yeah, he was actually one of the inspirations for why we did it in the first place, because Todd Matthews had made this list of missing and murdered Grateful Dead fans. And this was sent to me by Jake Brennan from Disgraceland, and it eventually turned into this podcast idea that we collaborated on called Dead and Gone.
Yeah.
And he's like the first person that I met with starting out on that project because he made that list and he kind of stayed with it throughout the series, and we, sent him updates, and from there we were sent down this rabbit hole of real-time investigation, and just a amazing dude. And I'm really sad to hear that he passed away.
I had no idea Todd was involved with that.
Yeah.
But this just
in the very
proves
first episode, like in the first 3 minutes.
my point that Todd's involved in everything.
Oh, yeah. Dude is, yeah, of course he is, right?
For those listening who aren't familiar with Todd, he is the first digital age citizen sleuth. He solved the first case solved with the internet.
Yep.
The first Jane Doe ID'd. Her name was, Tent Girl, Barbara Hackman, I believe her name was. I think I got it right. He helped connect me with so many experts for my show and for my book. He connected a lot of us together, too. I know of 2 forensic scientists who are married because he introduced them. He actually married them himself.
He was the person who married them?
Yeah, he did the ceremony, yeah. He helped found NamUs. Are you pulling up the clip?
Yeah.
And Greg Niffen were murdered here. A man named Ralph Thomas was convicted and sentenced to death. So why am I here? Well, it all started with this guy.
Somebody had to do it. Somebody's going to invent penicillin. Somebody's going to invent the microwave. Eventually, somebody would have been the first cyber sleuth. It happened to be me. Guess right now, this is how we put a boutique.
My name is Payne Lindsey.
And I have people here.
This is Todd Matthews.
Yeah. Amazing dude.
He's amazing. But his Doe network, which he started after he identified Tent Girl as Barbara Ann Hagman. If I'm getting that name wrong, I'm so sorry.
That's correct, I think.
I think it's correct. I'm bad with a lot of things, strangely.
I'm really bad with names, so I don't even. And everyone always says that when they're kind of not that bad. But I am.
Me
bad
too.
At names.
So we're both probably.
I don't even know your name right now.
Me neither. We're both assuring each other of this name. We're both
think we know our
proudly
names.
Wrong. But he started the Doe Network, and that was the first database for IDing John and Jane Does, also known as unidentified persons. People may have seen the acronym UID that's used a lot for unidentified decedents. So that's what we mean when we say unidentified persons. And so those cases, I don't remember how we got here exactly, but I think we were talking about working on those
kind of
cases.
break down what that is.
Yeah,
right?
Working on those cases. And a lot of times for especially an unidentified decedent, you might have 2 lines in the newspaper and they'll say, a body found, woman's body found in the park, and that'll be it. So when we work on stuff like that, we're really looking at, we need to research around that So if you try and look up that in, newspapers.com or go into the archives, you're not going to find anything. So you start looking for what are similar cases. What's been happening at the area at the time? Were there festivals happening? Very much your Grateful Dead kind of stuff, right? What were major events happening? What were disturbances in the community? Were there major construction crews coming through at the time? There's so many things you can look at. And as you begin to build that information, like here in Atlanta, there were a series of stranglings that happened in the 80s and 90s. So if we find an unidentified woman who was strangled, we're immediately going to look at that pattern. Very much like how, we're going to consult like the Murder Accountability Project, just so many different kinds of things. And that's how we begin to build information around a topic. If it's something we're working on for a while, we're going to go to the place. We're going to talk to folks, see what they remember, and we just begin to build information that way.
So is the goal usually to link this unidentified body to likely a missing person?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, and I'm sure you figured this out in your work, a lot of missing people are not in the databases. So
which is baffling to me, but it's shockingly true.
And it's for a couple of reasons. One is that law enforcement don't enter them because not every state makes it compulsory, as you know.
Like they don't have to.
Yeah.
It's not part of the procedure like that they have to follow, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mandated, yeah.
Some states do, some states don't. And not every missing person is reported missing. That can be because family members don't consider them missing because of estrangement. And I'm sure you discovered this with your series Dead and Gone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also because of the missing. People who are living unhoused, people who are immigrants to the whose
kind of off the grid on their already, right?
Yeah, and their families don't realize they're missing because contact, they say, I'm moving to a different country, I'll be in contact soon, and something happened for months or years, and they think that family has just been in, intermittent contact. They don't realize they're missing. Teenagers who have run away, just so many things can happen.
So why did you get into this? Because this is a very kind of dark thing, right? I mean, but it needs to be done. So, why do you like doing what you do, and how'd you get into it in the first place?
So I was an English professor for a long time, and I started using, in my class, I didn't like to use books in class if I didn't have to.
Why? You're an English teacher.
Well, for one thing, it's expensive for students.
Like to have to buy books?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was at Georgia State for a long time, and I used books when I needed to, but especially in comp classes, I tried to avoid using books, and so I'd use lots of interesting articles, stuff from the paper, things that were free, but also things that engaged students.
Cool.
I know when you were in college, I'm sure, you liked the classes that engaged in things that were interesting to you,
which is like
culture, pop culture,
one or none.
One or none. I was
psychology, kind of.
Yeah, I was the same way. A lot of people dread English. And and they especially dread the really boring English classes like comp. And so I try to engage people. And so I would pull in articles about stuff they found interesting. One thing they found interesting was crime. And so I'd pull in, an article about a case that was going on, maybe something contemporary, maybe something cold. We'd analyze it and say, is this objective? How are they portraying the people who are in the article? Are we getting feelings about this case based on this? What information is there? What's being held back? And I would just begin to use that kind of stuff.
So you were the cool English teacher.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Because I liked English class. Is kind of I wouldn't even say liked. I didn't mind it as much, but I always wanted to do creative writing assignments, which was always what they didn't want to do. They wanted us to read the Odyssey or something, which this is at the beginning of Spark Notes, and back when you had to actually get them from a store and in a little book.
Oh, yeah.
So I didn't always excel in English, even though I was passionate about writing. But I had some cool teachers, and I had some that stuck to, the books and didn't think outside of the box or do anything cool like pulling up crime stories from newspapers.
Yeah, and sometimes they'd be like, can we read some stuff that's not crime? And I was like, oh, yeah.
They're like,
yeah, sorry.
What class is this again?
This is getting dark. So I made sure to include some of that. This was also the era of the confessional essay.
Oh, wow.
So I'd be pulling stuff off like Exojane or whatever, you know? Yeah, all kinds of stuff. And so as we read some of this stuff, I started to pull in articles that would show them the different kinds of coverage that people would get based on who they were. Something I know you've talked about on your shows.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So one person, would get 300,000 articles. One person had 4. Why is that? Google hits. And that's how I got involved. Ultimately, I got a grant to teach podcasting. And then, unfortunately, realized I didn't know how to make a podcast.
But you were teaching it.
Was going to.
Okay.
And so figured out I needed how to use the equipment.
You didn't fake it till you make it?
Yeah, I did. But I also did not know, I know you at least had made music videos and things like that.
Yeah.
I had literally never turned on a microphone.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I didn't know how to make a podcast either, but I had a couple different skill sets that I had learned over the years in the video world. Like one of them, the main one being editing.
Yeah.
And so I edited the entire first season of Up and Vanished in Adobe Premiere, which is a video software program, which thinking about that now sounds like I don't even know how I could do that today. But I had complicated episodes just in the audio section of the entire timeline and no video up top because that's all I knew how to do. And I didn't want to learn a new program yet because learning a new program sucks.
That's so far above the level I was at.
Well, hey, I mean, what was your level at? What were you doing?
0.
Well, you made a podcast eventually, so what happened?
It sounded very bad.
Okay, how'd you do it?
Under a sheet using free software.
Under a sheet? You just wanted to look like a ghost when you were doing it? You were trying to make the audio sound better.
Optimally, yes, but also to make the audio sound better. With the roughest cuts you can imagine. And people were so nice because they could tell that our hearts were pure. I roped in...
she's trying really hard. Cut her some slack here, guys.
I roped in one of my friends from college, Brooke, who's a licensed professional counselor, to do family interviews because I knew that was not my forte.
That was smart.
Yeah, she's trained me since then.
That's awesome.
Much better. And it's helped me in my own work that I work on outside of the podcast.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. To be able to talk to families sensitively, But I was like, that is not my area. But we were just under a sheet doing terrible sounding cuts.
Are you still under the sheet?
No.
Oh, man.
Very, very wisely hired a producer named Maura Curry who came from Georgia Public Broadcasting. And she remastered everything pretty intensely.
Well, that's amazing, though, because that's an art of its own, really. The fact that you can take audio that doesn't sound that good and make it sound really good is an art form. It's funny you mentioned the recording under a sheet.
Yeah.
I was recently in an Airbnb in LA. I was recording, I think, episode 3 and 4 of this season, and I was just in this concrete box of an Airbnb. It was cool, but it was so echoey in there and so much reverb when you said anything. So I was looking around for a place to record that would be decent at all. And upstairs they had this cabinet that if I was standing up, my face would go right into this cabinet area. And so I put a bunch of pillows back there and they had a curtain in front of it. So I put the curtain behind me. I actually have a funny video that someone took.
I was just thinking I saw that video.
Yes, and that was really in the moment. I look crazy.
I thought you were in a bunk bed.
Right. It doesn't make any sense where I'm at, but the audio sounded so good. So, hey, the sheet method still works.
I'm glad to be out from under.
I prefer to just be sitting right here and just not have to think too much about it.
Yeah.
So you eventually graduated beyond the bed sheet, and now you're doing all kinds of podcasts. You've made so many episodes and seasons. Tell me about where you're at now with that, and why you like the podcast format, and why you've stuck with that.
Well, podcasting to me is a lot like writing. Mm-hmm. So, it is writing for me.
Sure.
That's the way I work, so we work on scripts for months. I write them, put them together. I'm a huge introvert, so I get to sit in the padded closet my husband built for me.
Amazing.
Yeah, he just made all
live
of
in your own little world.
Yeah.
And write like you wanted to do probably as a kid, right?
Yeah. I'm an only child, so I can happily sit in the closet for long periods of time and just talk to Maura over my headphones as she chastises criticizes me for, making too much noise, banging into stuff. And it's great. But I like the medium a lot because I think it's really accessible. And that's what I've always liked about it. And that's why I wanted to introduce it to my students.
Yeah.
There's a low bar to entry. It's changing now, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's harder, but that still exists in a way, and it did for a long time.
Yeah. And I like the fact that people can hear a podcast that affects them, whether it's emotionally or intellectually. It makes them want to do something about the world. And then they feel like, okay, I can start this. I have kids email me a lot and say, how do I get started on this? And I can actually tell them for $150, you can legitimately start on this.
Bed Bath & Beyond, Best Buy.
Yeah, and I have a list of stuff from when I was still teaching that I can send them. And that makes me feel happy because I love teenagers and I love young adults from teaching them. I just really do.
Someone's got to love them.
I do. I mean, that was my favorite part about teaching. I don't like any of the rules and I don't like faculty meetings. Yeah. But I love kids because they're so cool to talk to.
They probably think you're so cool because you're anti that, if they know that.
I mean, I don't know what they think. I think they were fond of me and they're like, okay, you're not bad for an old person.
You're like, I'm not that old, but okay, thanks.
You don't want to know how old they think people are.
I mean, I don't either, I guess.
27 to them is creaky, like you need to go ahead and prepare for
I'm ancient then.
Yeah, me
I'm
too.
Dead.
Yeah, prepare for, you're beyond dead.
Yeah, I've been dead.
Yeah, you've been
for
dead.
Almost 10 years.
Yeah, goodbye. But they're just, so excited to share their thoughts about the world. So that's one of the things I love about podcasting is that we can hear so many voices. I hope they don't get drowned out as the industry continues to sort of conglomerate.
How do you feel about that? Because it definitely has, you've had a podcast for quite some time.
7 years.
I'm trying to think the first time I ever remember coming across your podcast, The Fall Line, and learning of you. I want to say that my favorite murder came and did a show at the Cobb Energy Center here years ago. Mm-hmm. And I went and I was planning on meeting them for the first time after the show. And actually, my friend's wife came and she was actually a huge fan and thought it was so cool. They were so nice and, met with her, took a picture. But I think during that show, they mentioned that there's 2 other Atlanta podcasters here, and they mentioned me and you. And I was like, what's The Fall Line? And I was like, what is that? Why don't I know what that is? And I think that's the first time I ever put together you and you being here and your show, which that's probably 5 years ago now.
Yeah, it was
maybe more. I don't know. I'll just say 5.
6, maybe 6. I know because we were sitting directly behind you because they had you stand up. And then they had us
close?
stand up.
Okay.
That's how I know you were there.
So I didn't see you because you were behind me?
Yeah.
Okay, but you saw me stand up?
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny.
I mean, you're right in front of me, so it was...
I blocked your view, my big-ass head.
I'm really tall, so I could still see.
Okay, so you could still see her.
I don't know about Brooke. She may have been blocked.
So yeah, so much has changed in the podcast space from a business standpoint, the amount of content, and especially when it comes to true crime podcasts, right? Just so many of them. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard. I can say this because, I don't think you are, for all intents and purposes, an indie podcaster.
Absolutely.
Because you guys started out indie and it's an independent company.
Yeah.
You're not, there's no large conglomerate.
I'm not doing it for the man, the corporate whatever, right?
And I think that people forget that some of these companies that have gotten bigger are independent in their own way.
Exactly.
Audio Chuck's independent too.
Absolutely.
Great
example. Yeah.
I'm thinking of Malcolm Gladwell's company is independent and, Pushkin's independent. Mm-hmm. But we have had our show. We have 2 shows. One's The Fall Line and one's One Strange Thing. We launched One Strange Thing during COVID, and it has been a much harder launch. It's a paranormal show that's based totally on news archives, and we dig into wild stories. Like right now I'm digging into this girl who is rumored to be a werewolf in Georgia. Like
Rumored
right
to
after,
be. So people think that she's a werewolf right now.
well, no, she's mad dead. But
okay.
she died in 1911.
She was once a werewolf.
Yeah, but there's
Apparently.
her name's Emily Elizabeth, like Isabella Burt, and she's from Talbot County, and everyone thought she was a werewolf. But
Why?
that's what I'm trying to figure out, is like where the story started. And I'm like tracing it down all these crazy newspapers, and I'm into census records, and like I'm really using an inordinate amount of time on this. That's her other show.
That sounds fun.
It's a blast.
Do you think that she really could be a werewolf? Are werewolves real? I won't judge you.
Off the record, just for your listeners, no, I don't think werewolves are real. Officially for the show, maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
But do I think that people have the mental disorder of
About to say.
lycanthropy? Yeah, I do.
Okay, I think that somebody could act like a werewolf.
Can
I
think
think
they're
I've
a
seen
werewolf. Yeah, I think I
that
do.
in LA a couple times in downtown Hollywood. So the podcast space today, wildly different. There's so many true crime podcasts, and I just want your thoughts on the fact that there is so many podcasts and true crime podcasts, and so many people are doing it in so many different ways. And, I think there's a right and wrong way to do everything. And there's a lot of nuance that comes with that that doesn't necessarily always apply to each individual, show. But, what are your feelings on it kind of being, in a way, from my point of view, open season when it comes to making true crime podcasts?
I've heard a lot of my friends describe this industry as still being in its Wild West era, and I feel like that's really true.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how standards are being developed,
Okay.
you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, we're still talking about, like, how do we do this correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, like...
What are the big things to you?
Because I think the big problem here is that everybody would love, like, an ethics template to follow, I think. Because that's easy. Because when you know what's right and what's wrong, you go, okay, I just have to follow this list of things, and then I'm good, and I can keep on going.
But what guides an ethics template?
That's
in the
the
first
problem.
place, right? Where does that come from to begin with? That's somebody's opinion, really, in a way. I mean, like, it's not a law.
Exactly, and that's the rub, because there is no template that can apply to every situation. And as soon as you try to do that, you're not thinking in a nuanced way about each individual family, each individual case, and the needs of each person, because no family or case has the same needs. And you can't just apply
Right.
a broad stroke and say, I'm good to go. I don't need to think deeply about this anymore. And that's the problem.
And I think that's kind of what I've always leaned into, because you're right. There is no set rule book. I even talked about that in the latest episode of Up and Vanished. And I really was saying it in a genuine way, because if there was, I would obviously be referring to it. But I kind of felt like this was outside of a familiar territory for me. I don't have a lot of places and things to look at around me to kind of guide how I should be conducting myself based on how they did that in this extremely similar situation. And so, I've always leaned into the families, because they're the ones that are the most impacted by this. They're the ones who have experienced a loss. And just like everyone is different, every family is different too. And, if they're happy with what's going on and how it's being treated and talked about, then that gives me a lot of validation and, I guess, the strength to keep going forward down that same path, because it's almost like they approved it. And, someone could say, oh, I don't think you should do this. But if we talked together and we wanted to do this and you wanted to do that, then that's not even for you to say, really. It's like, you tell me what you'd want to do with your family, like I would tell you mine. But, obviously if you're not breaking laws and, morally stepping out of bounds.
Yeah, and every family wants to work differently.
Absolutely.
Because we work in a way differently than you. Like we're done by the time the episode comes. Like we're not still working on something.
I mean, bless you.
Yeah.
Because that sounds awesome.
I've done it your way once.
Mm-hmm. It's not my preferred method, but
it's hard.
It's hard, and I've done shows since Up and Vanished where I don't do it that way. Like High Strange, I was completely out at one time, and with an investigative show like this, which I learned from season 1, there is a lot to be learned when the podcast is out, and it's kind of part of the whole thing. It's like the reason why I'm doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the podcast, in a weird way, is a meta tool itself to get people to talk more.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I acknowledge that, then I'm leaving the door cracked enough to do last minute changes and go get this person. If I wouldn't have had, 30 or 40% of what you've heard so far in Up and Vanished if I hadn't done that.
And I think that speaks to the different kinds of podcasts too, because what's investigative work versus what's informative work versus what's work that's meant to get more information out to the public that they didn't have before and to try and generate leads. And ours falls into the latter two.
Yeah,
that's what we mostly work on.
Difference here,
Yeah.
good examples of the difference, I think, with our shows.
Like my book was investigative, but it was written after we finished the investigation.
Right.
And so that's different. So like when I'm getting out, we just did a series with Nashville PD on 22 of their Doe cases. And we helped resolve one of the cases while we were working on it.
Amazing.
But
good job.
It was mostly about just connecting the right people together, and then figuring out where information was missing. But that wasn't done like on the move. Like that was done before I wrote the episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like if I had to do that in the middle of it, like I don't know how I would have put that script together, because that would have been like, oh, psych, hold on.
Yeah.
Let's rewind. And like that I think I would have.
You have like a vision in your head, right? Like an outline and a script and.
Yeah. Then I don't know how I would have gone back and done that. Like I would have had to go to bed. So, it's just a completely different way of approaching it. So I don't know if people think that much about the different genres of podcasting and how they serve different purposes.
Right. They kind of all lump them together, which they're really different things in so many ways.
Exactly. Aggregation. Information, reaching out to the public with calls to action, investigative, different purposes. And so, of course, we're all going to operate differently. Yeah.
And that's not even like what you do and what you're, I think, even the best at is what I'm not the best at, right? Is this sort of historical element of putting those pieces together and informing the public in a way in 2024 that gets their attention and does that respectfully and pushes the ball forward. I feel like I'm better at disrupting something or, approaching a person of interest or, like a different style of storytelling that would not be the best platform for something like that. For me specifically.
I sent you one, actually. You check your Tenderfoot email.
You sent me an email about a case.
Yeah.
Recently, right?
Yeah, like 2 days ago.
Yeah, okay. I didn't read it yet. What's the case?
I sent you a case to look at that I thought would be better for Up and Vanished.
Oh, wow.
Because for that reason, actually, that showed up in our inbox. It's a more recent case. And it's a case where, I'm not going to say the name of the case in case you end up doing it, but it's a case where dating apps figure really heavily in the case, and Snapchat and things disappearing and all kinds of stuff that's just out of my purview, and where people in a small town aren't talking.
You're on that Snapchat?
No.
You don't get those snaps?
No. I thank God my child's young enough to where he doesn't know what that is.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. I'm hoping it'll just gone away by that point, because I don't want to have to talk about don't use Snapchat.
I mean, maybe Snapchat goes away, but the other ones don't.
He's busy on Roblox currently.
There you go.
I'll just keep feeding him Roblox money with the chat turned on.
Seriously, just. Yeah.
But yeah, I sent you one for that very reason, because it was in this purview that does not fall into my area of strength, which would be going and talking in a small town with people who were using dating apps that people usually don't like to tell people they're on, was the sense that I got. People who, in a small town, who don't want to talk about what they're doing, but are all communicating with each other sort of underneath the surface.
That's an interesting thing.
That's what I thought. And I was like, can they give me an archival newspaper article about it? I don't know. So I was like, there's a few people I think who might be interested in this. And so that's what I do. When I get stories that are outside of my area of strength, I think about the people I know who are good at that.
That's great.
And I help connect families with them because I think we all have our different strengths.
Yeah.
And I know lots of folks who are good at different stuff. You know, like, do I want to get it out to a big audience? Do I need someone who can look into this special thing? I think that's how we all should be working.
100%. Yeah, let's don't all assume that we're the best at anything, one, but two, that if we want to genuinely help, that one way of doing that is, spreading this around more with amongst ourselves and our peers.
Yeah.
Too, right? Do you experience as much negative feedback as I do?
No.
You just know that as a definitive answer?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you know? You just because you do.
Because I don't. We experience very little negative feedback. That's how I know that. Almost none.
That's amazing. Okay.
It's I think part of it is that.
I mean, you shouldn't. I'm just.
Well,
asking.
because I can say that because we get almost none. So part of it, I think, part of it is because and this is both because I have my own like separate career. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So part of it's the fall line. We're not front-facing people at all. Like it's people, a lot of people couldn't tell you what I look like or what Brooke looks like.
You're more behind the scenes.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then I do OST for One Strange Thing. We're a little more forward facing, but that's like I know we both are friends with other paranormal podcasters.
Yeah.
We can be a little more forward facing there because it's chiller.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of more fun.
It's fun and you can have more of your
Two Girls, One Ghost, right?
Yeah, we have done crossovers with them. Like I love them both, and we can have fun and we, can talk about Jeff the Ghost Mongoose or whatever and have a good time.
Yeah.
And in terms of like my writing, like my book and stuff like that, like I can be more forward facing. Mm-hmm. But because we keep ourselves in the background on stuff, we don't have an audience that goes, oh, hey, you. And, I talked to, I know my good friend Sarah Turney was just on your show.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love
and
her.
she's a real good friend of mine. We had talked about this a lot. And she always says to me, like, Laura, it's a trade-off. Like, if you want to be more successful, you do have to, like, come out of your cave a little bit. And I'm like, I'm going to stay back here and just be a writer. So I think that's partially why. It's because we are very background people, and we've always done that on purpose. Mm-hmm. Part of it is because we tell stories that have gotten just no coverage, nothing. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes to get the story in the front, we felt from the very beginning, and because we're not out doing stuff where we have to talk to people, we're talking to family members, like, I'm narrating, but we've tried to kind of pull our personalities back. And that's been both a detriment and a benefit, if that makes sense.
I see.
It keeps us in the middle. You have to have personality to go to the top. It's just the truth. You're not going to get to the top without inserting yourself, like your personality, because you need listeners to connect to you.
Right.
Show me one at the top. Even Case File, even though he's anonymous, people connect to the fact that he's anonymous.
Yeah, you like that though.
Yeah.
You still like him.
They gave him a nickname. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but there's people who could name both my podcasts, but couldn't pick me out of a lineup.
Right.
He's anonymous, so okay. Even I'm good friends with the host of Swindled.
Yeah.
And his being anonymous is a shtick, but his personality comes through very much.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And we've pulled back on that, and so I think that's why we don't get it.
Yeah, I had this moment yesterday where I'm pretty good at keeping the blinders on and not really paying too much attention to negativity on the internet. One, because I've just seen it for a long time. Even before I made podcasts, I'd seen it. Like back when I was doing music, which is a whole another story, and doing music videos on YouTube, we were getting like a lot of views back then. And there was, that was my first kind of introduction to an online stranger saying whatever they wanted about how they thought about me. Yeah. And so I've gotten used to that. But, I feel like with true crime specifically, because of the subject matter and the serious nature of it and just the level of realness and just what's at stake here, it's almost like it's the highest it could be.
Yeah.
And I feel like that elicits emotions from people, even as listeners. And I feel like because I'm an outward voice in the show, it's kind of like I become subject to, I don't know, some of those feelings as well, in a way, because I'm like, well, who do you have? You got the family, the victim, the police, the persons of interest, the friends, and then you have this person who's going around saying a lot of stuff and putting it all together. You know, I feel like I'm in this bag of individuals now where you can, I don't know, associate something to that, some sort of strong emotion. But I was sent like a Reddit thread. I was like, oh, there's a new one, cool. I was like, you know what's funny is like, and it's not that, like, I'm talking about it and I'm trying to figure out a way to say this where it doesn't sound like that it bothers me like this much, because it really doesn't. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of a awareness thing that I've developed, that some people are just disappointing. And that's kind of what it is. It's like, it's not bringing me down, but if I were to sit here and say, you suck, you suck, you suck, like, eventually you'd be like, shut up, that's annoying. Mm-hmm. Or like, stop doing that. Like, I'm trying to focus on this. And I don't know. I just am always curious about the human psychology of it. And I could see how somebody would, I'd probably think that I was a douchebag. I'd be like, who's this guy think he is? But I feel like that's also a bullshit take, and also like low-hanging fruit. And you didn't really put any thought into it. You didn't really care or want to. But it's just funny because I always want other people's perspectives on that.
It's interesting because I think that every person that does documentary podcasting, because I really think that is the genre, right? I mean, maybe that's not.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I think it is, because if I think about like Connie Walker or David Ridgen or Your Own Backyard, Chris, what is his last name?
Lambert.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I told you bad
great
with names.
Storytellers, great podcast.
Anyone that does like, because that's a different genre, different than what I do, different than what a lot of people do, where people are out in the world, you know what I mean, doing things on the ground as it happens. Everyone's going to have a distinctly different personality. Hide and Seek's another one. Mm-hmm. And there's other ones
James
too.
Basinger, love that guy.
Yeah. I haven't listened to it, but I know that's a documentary podcast.
Yeah, it's really good.
And I've actually taught some of these in my classes.
Oh, wow.
I taught Connie Walker's. Both are, now she's at 3, but both of her podcasts. Everybody's going to have a different personality. People are going to either operate on like how they connect to the case. They may step back and operate as the camera with very little, you know what I mean? Like, what's your camera position? You know what I mean? Like, are you in front of the camera? Or are you behind the camera?
Yeah.
And people are going to respond to that differently. Some people want someone in front of the camera. Some people want someone behind the camera. Mm-hmm. And your audience is going to say, I want you in front of the camera. I want you behind the camera. But they're not going to be uniform. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? No audience is going to be uniform on that. Yeah. When I got reviews for my book, I didn't read them actually at all. None of them.
Good for you.
It's like, okay, look, with a podcast, you can make adjustments. A book's done,
this
dude.
Shit.
Yeah, the book's done, dude.
This
like, oh well, like it's too late for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But my dad decided to give me a rundown anyway. Merry Christmas.
Of all your reviews,
just some of them.
You're like, thanks.
He's a writer. I guess he can help himself, you know. But I was like, Dad, stop. Like, it's late. But he said,
I've only heard positive things. So.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you checking them. But even if you didn't, I appreciate that.
No, just from other people that have read your book. I have not read your book yet, but I've perused it before today's interview.
Very good prep.
It would take me 9 months to read this book.
It's on Audible.
Okay, well, that's on me.
Yeah, well, you didn't know. I'm just telling you now. Look,
I didn't know. Now everyone knows.
Payne, my own husband. Did you see the bookmark that was in there? It was like 30 pages in.
In here?
Oh, I may have pulled it out, but that was my
That's
own.
how far you made it?
That's my husband's copy.
Like 6 months ago, probably?
The book came out in October. Yeah. So, yeah, and we were married. So,
Yeah. Hey. He's like, I already know this story.
but half the people said I didn't put myself enough in there, and half of them said I inserted myself too much. So,
Okay. Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
I think that, do I have advice for you about what to do about that? I don't.
I don't really mean advice.
Yeah, but or
what's
like
your
thoughts
take
or
on that?
take on that.
Yeah.
I think that ultimately you have to be happy with the product that you're putting out. Do you know what I mean? Like, does it serve the purpose that you want it to serve? Like, we decided really early on that we had to be way in the background to serve the purpose that we wanted it to serve.
Sure.
And there are some drawbacks to that.
Right.
And the drawbacks are that we don't connect with our audience. The story connects, but we don't connect.
Yeah.
And that does affect our ability to grow our podcast in some ways. It just does. That's just what it comes down to.
Okay.
And it's not the same thing for OST, but it does. And so I think that you have to just weigh, like, where do I belong in the story? You know what I mean? Like, and is being here where I am in the story, is this important? And I think that's just because this just comes from me being a creative writing professor, I think. And like, is my narrative position here, 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 here? And I think every documentary podcast maker has to decide that.
Yeah.
And if it feels like the right place to you, then that's the right place to you.
I've just personally, as a listener and viewer of other content, have personally enjoyed the most the first-person narrative perspective. My favorite movies are the ones that have a narrator, like Shawshank Redemption or something, right? Movies that have like an omniscient voice. Like for me, I think I follow it better, but I kind of like this sort of balance between something playing out and some other thing that's like working around it, just from a storytelling standpoint. And I think that some people have viewed that in Up and Vanish, at least, as like a more of a selfish insertion for like my own gratification or something, which I mean, like, it's the furthest thing from that. I'm cringing myself in every edit, but I like telling the story that way, and I've just tried to only expand on what that experience is really like, because I feel like in a lot of the documentary true crime podcasts, you don't always get the other human side of what's really going on. Like, you hear a voice and the audio sounds good. How did we get here? Like, did you forget, because I think you did, that we talked to all of these people in real life? Like, we met them. It wasn't easy. They were hesitant, or they were appreciative, or like all these different nuances to like what's going on, instead of just being so buttoned up that it just feels like, I don't know, like surreal and not very real. And like that was my approach this season. I kind of wanted to show that more, knowing that I'd open myself up for more criticism and sort of the why are you putting yourself in the story take. But I also chose to, you know, if I was going to do it that way, go the extra mile and go find that Oregon John guy, right? Like, if I'm going to do it, am I going to actually hop on the saddle and really do it? And so that's like, you know, the challenge I put forth to myself, so I would feel okay about it, to be honest, and take you through what that was like, because I feel like I would be curious. I'd want to know what that was like, personally, me.
Do you feel like, as someone with a background in film, that it's filling in for you that visual aspect that is missing for you in podcasting?
Totally.
So do you feel like you need to fill in the visual aspect? Because that's what's occurring to me when you're talking.
Yeah. Well, how I make the show first is I get all these interviews and everything, and I build it out in segments, right? And they kind of become in sequential order. And so at a certain point, you know, when it's like 70% done, you could play it and there'll be gaps where my VO will come in eventually, but it's not there yet. And I want to be able to hear it, and like, you should be able to hear that and know what's going on. Like, they're telling the story. So anything that I'm saying now is additive, or is expanding on it in some way. And so so it's less reliant. And so I'm either there just to help like push it along because you can't have subtitles or whatever in a podcast, or to paint a picture or to add some other story element that is my own or whatever it is. And so like that's my method. I do my VO dead last, but I think over time it's kind of become its own thread. As
somebody who's not so visual, I do like a plot arc.
Okay.
Like a writer.
Classic story arc.
Like a story arc. And I like break it down that way. And it's just interesting to me because I think that what you're describing makes me think of you hearing voiceover in your head when you're breaking it down.
I can hear it now when I'm editing.
Yeah. And so I think maybe what we're talking about here are just fundamentally different approaches.
Yes.
And I think that all of the documentary podcasters do use voiceover. Maybe when we talk to people, and I think people can still offer their critiques. By the way, people don't talk shit online, but they do talk shit in the reviews. I should mention this. Everyone says that I sound like Siri, and now they say AI instead.
Have you ever done an AI version of your voice?
No. Right now, I have really bad allergies, so I don't think anybody wants to hear that. But yeah,
AI would sound just fine.
It would, yeah. I will say I think that women podcasters just get raked over the coals for our voices in general.
I've seen that.
Yeah,
that's annoying. That's unfortunate.
We do get shit on in reviews, just for vocals, 100%. So I shouldn't. I wanted to share that with you. So you didn't just feel like just you were getting it?
Oh, well, thank you, yeah.
But I think that maybe if we all started to think about how the different genres are put together and like what the conceits of genres are, we could then talk about like what they need to function, and then we could kind of weigh them against each other. We can still have critiques of them.
Yeah, like,
we can say this person
need critique.
talks.
Yeah, we need that.
We can say we don't like this about how this person does this. We wish this person talked more about themselves. This person talked less. We want this person not to tip the hat too soon, whatever it is, right? But I think we talk not enough about the expectations of genre, and that's kind of important.
That's a good point.
How do we combine, like we can't compare.
But that's a creator's perspective.
Yeah, it is a creator's perspective.
It's like, the layperson's like, I don't give a shit about that.
But I think they might.
Maybe they do.
Because if
some people will.
People get excited to learn. Like this is the teacher coming in.
Some people, I do. I think a lot of our listeners do.
Yeah, like teacher me coming in is saying that when people have the language to discuss things, they're excited to discuss them. I really think that. Because people like to learn about things they're interested in.
So the future of true crime podcasting, like, where do you want to see it go? And like, I was really in my own dilemma with this last episode, and I meant all those things that I said. And like, as I sort of formulated it over time and sat with it and really kind of zoomed out, I felt a little less scared about the whole thing. But I've never done anything like this where I tricked somebody in order to talk to them. And I felt like in this scenario, it was the only way I could do this. And I guess you could say that we don't know that, but I've done this enough times, and you can look back at all the people I've ever confronted from the Up and Vanished TV show. There's like 5 people there. There's Dead and Gone, Bo. There's Catfish, John in season 2, which is ironic. There's Paul in season 3. It's a lot of, and they're all bad dudes. Like they really, like whether they did anything related to their disappearance or not, which there's a lot of evidence that supports that, they're bad dudes. And I was so sick of, I don't know, giving them a pass. If the FBI does this stuff, now I'm not the FBI, so, but like, yeah, they have a badge, they did training, but like, I don't know, where's the line or the rule book for investigative journalism, undercover stuff? Like, does that exist? I mean, people have clearly done this before in some way, but I don't know. What was your, like, when you listened to it, did it rub you the wrong way, or what did it feel like to you, or I don't know?
I tend to err on the side of caution myself, but I work with law enforcement a lot. So, not that they're sending me out in the field, right? They're not like, why are you up? Go on the field.
Oh, you again.
Yeah, like that. I am not someone to put out into the field. Because I would be like, can I schedule an appointment with you to, like I said, send you a Zoom link and we can chat? Yeah, that's not going to work. I work with law enforcement on the back end. Like I said, one of my great skills in life is getting into a file room. That is what
Lily, you are the goat at that.
I'm good at that. They tend to like me. I can get in the file room. I
get the librarian vibes, though.
Yeah.
Get the English teacher.
Yeah. I'm
tone.
good at that.
That's a
good at
whole
building
thing.
trust. I'm good at that, but not someone who generally will go speak to people where I'm worried about it affecting an investigation. In this case, it feels a little individual and unique because when I heard them say that Florence didn't have a case file, that made me really pause because if that is indeed the case, I really question whether there would be any effect on an investigation. Now, in terms of like whether tape could be used in an investigation, that's a whole different thing because of chain of evidence. I don't know, right? That's outside my purview. But speaking to somebody, I feel like reporters speak to people. I don't consider myself to be a journalist. I consider myself to be a writer researcher, like I didn't go to J school, I didn't study enough about journalism to feel like this. I feel like I have to have, this is something me and Maura talk about a lot because she is a journalist. We feel like we practice journalism often. But like to be a journalist, I feel like I would have to know a little bit more about what it's like to work day to day for a large journalism outlet to have been given those assignments to learn it. But I feel like everybody can call themselves whatever they want. We're all just giving ourselves titles. Yeah. Right, writer researcher works for me because that's what I do most of. Like I'm not out in the field like being like knock knock hello, please don't shoot me at the door. You know what I mean?
Don't recommend it.
I am not going to.
Yeah, no need to.
No, my health insurance is not great, Payne. I'm self-employed.
Yeah. But hey, I mean the file room's a safe place.
Yeah, it is. Well, do you know?
Usually.
Do you know how often we had come upon where human remains in file rooms?
I don't.
Less than zero.
Okay, that's too many times.
We'll talk sometime about how remains get lost and how we find them. How we find them. Human remains get lost in cases all the time.
That's just okay.
And then we have to go look for them. Different story. But I think that in a case where there's no file, and everything's at a dead end, it could be reasonable to speak with somebody. And this seems like a unique situation to me, honestly.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
Would in other situations, if you had been for some reason to call me, someone who is an acquaintance, to say, hey, Laura, should I go do this? I would likely have said, no, you should not, right?
Yeah.
But this is, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the retired police officer who is now a detective also think you should go do that?
He surprised me by that.
Yeah.
I thought for sure he was going to say something along the lines of, hey, man, like this is where I would draw the line. He was like, no, keep doing this even beyond our first meeting. Yeah. And I was like, really?
He seemed to support it, which to me...
Because he also knows about the police up there.
Yeah, which made me think that perhaps he felt like the case was just not going to be getting looked into at all. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to me like a special situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how I felt about it. And, I look at it like, okay, what's the goal? The goal is to find out what happened. I can't arrest anybody. That's not, I don't have the ability to, right? I could find all the smoking guns. I could have written and verbal, video confessions that add up. I could have all this stuff in a box for law enforcement and give it to them. And I can't make anyone do anything with that, or control how fast they do it, if it works or not in the court system, if it sticks. Zero control over that. And so I guess one of the fears would be, okay, well, what if we learn all this stuff and we can't use it in court now? Well, my response to that would be like, okay, well, we only are saying that because now we know something. Like we didn't know that before. Mm-hmm. So like is there value in knowing something? For the family, there is, because part of what they're going through that they've told me in this traumatic experience, obviously they want justice. They also want to find flow. They also want to know what happened, right? And feel like they're not crazy for thinking this Oregon John guy may be associated with it. And, I can only imagine what that would feel like, but trying to put myself in their shoes, I would want to know. And I think that there's value in that. And if it's a step that should have been taken that wasn't by law enforcement, then at least that's being called out. It's not like it's over. You guys have resources that I don't have. I just dug something up for you. Hopefully you do something with it. And at least if you don't, everyone knows that you didn't. Because I think that there's a lack of accountability that's existed in this particular area for a long time. That's one thing that I can do is say, hey, everybody, look what's going on over here. That's like one of the few things that are in my control is actually doing that, exposing it. And, I don't know, maybe people feel the pressure of that or do the right thing.
If it's true that she doesn't have a file, it's incredibly egregious. And I think getting that information out there is important because that would then perhaps force the hand of law enforcement to reopen her investigation, because it's obvious that if she doesn't have a file, there is no investigation, and that needs to be exposed. And that's important.
I'm pretty sure it's lost in limbo between the Nome Police Department and the FBI.
Yeah.
And I think that they were telling the truth when they said they don't have a case file, because I've always imagined, well, what the hell could be in it? Because I've never heard of anyone being interviewed ever.
Yeah.
So what would even be in there? Oregon John talks about this too, and, about being investigated. But, without giving too much away, I think it lines up with there probably not being a case file.
An incident report, probably. And then, because you said it got passed over to the FBI, but you're not clear on what the FBI did?
To my knowledge, it never got officially passed over. At one point early on, a few weeks in, they requested assistance from the FBI Anchorage office for help searching, right? And so they came to Nome for a few days, a few agents to help do a ground search for her body.
Okay.
And they left, and to my knowledge, haven't been back there. When I emailed the FBI, they deferred me to Nome PD. Like, if you talk to them first, pointing the finger that it's their case. They can call us at any time and we can get involved. But I think it's been stuck in limbo where they're not really doing anything. They're not asking for help for whatever reason. But again, we should know. Her family should know. The community should know. And so let's find out. Tell them.
Yeah.
And that's all I can really do.
Okay. Yeah, getting a case officially handed over is different than getting resources brought in. We know this from Georgia,
right?
With the GBI, because the GBI often comes in to assist with a smaller police department or sheriff's office, and they'll come in and they'll lend help with searches. They'll lend help with the labs, but officially taking over a case is a different story.
Let's talk about your book real quick and where people can find it.
Okay.
Which is?
It came out. It's called Lay Them to Rest, and it is about forensic science and also my experience following forensic experts as we work to solve the cold case of the woman formerly known as Ina Jane Doe. She is a homicide victim that was discovered in a state park in the small town of Ina, Illinois in 1993. I spent a couple of years learning about forensic science because as I began to work on Doe cases, I realized that I didn't know much about forensic science, being a creative writing professor.
Yeah, I don't know much at all. So.
I had to learn everything.
Wow.
And now, I consider myself now at a good, solid 6th grade level of forensic science.
Pretty good.
Yeah, because I had good teachers. So I worked closely with a lot of really wonderful folks, artists, forensic odontologists, anthropologists, DNA scientists, genealogists who taught me things. So we worked on this case from the very beginning. The sheriff's office was nice enough to hand over the case to us. We did skeletal analysis. When I say we, like I watched, right? Yeah, and like took notes. But I did the case file review and I did the research on the case, and her case got solved.
That's amazing.
So the case gets solved during the book, and I spent the last 6 months of it working directly with her family. So she has been identified as Susan Menard Lund, a 25-year-old mother from Tennessee who disappeared on Christmas Eve.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's and that's not spoiling it because there's a lot more in the book.
How's that feel? Like you solved a case.
I helped solve it.
You helped solve a case.
I helped solve a case. So
you did. You really did.
It was really, really, really amazing to meet her family. I met them the night before the press conference at Cracker Barrel. I took them out to dinner.
Good breakfast.
Yeah, I hadn't been to Cracker Barrel. I didn't know they had them.
Weird, but it's good.
I thought it was a Southern thing.
It is definitely a Southern thing.
But they have them in Illinois. Apparently, it's a Midwestern thing, so people have lied to us.
I could see them in Illinois.
But it was just amazing to sit there with them because they brought these pictures of her that had been through a fire and a flood.
Wow.
That they'd held on to.
Damn, and they still had them.
Yeah. And they'd been looking for her for years, but her case was improperly closed, which is in the book.
Horrible.
Yeah, someone had claimed to be her. That's why it got improperly closed. There's a lot of mishandling of that case, but they'd been looking for her this whole time. Her kids thought she'd run away, just so much. But there's a $10,000 reward in the case. I put up half of it. Dr. Amy Michael, the forensic anthropologist I work with, put up the other half of it. Amy is real cool. The book is not all death and depression. It's funny too.
Based on the cover, it's got some color to it.
Yeah,
I love this color scheme and the art.
The art's beautiful. It's by Peter Strain. Little side note just for your listeners, I did let my at the time 8-year-old pick out the color of the cover.
Yeah, I think he was spot on with that one.
Yeah, he said, don't make it depressing and spooky. Make it pretty. So I said,
less spooky, Mom.
Good call.
You're always so spooky.
He knew what he was getting into with his family. My husband was a punk rock metal musician who used to be a bouncer at the Masquerade at one time.
Nice.
Here in Atlanta, and me, well, so he knew what he was in for. But that's what the book's about, and it's just a look. I wanted people who don't know much about forensics to better understand science, but to also understand how many unidentified people there are in the world. Because the thing is, people who want to help solve cases, these are the cases you can solve, and they're not just through DNA.
Right.
Skeletal reanalysis, art research. Yeah. One of my friend's students just solved a Doe case.
Wow, that's amazing.
In Southeast Missouri, just with newspaper articles.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So these are the cases.
Possible.
Podcasters, these are the cases we can solve.
Seriously, like this is like how you can utilize a podcast to actually do some real good.
Yeah. Like I said, we closed one on the fall line not that long ago just with putting paperwork together. It's not what's the word I want? Glamorous per se, you know what I mean?
I think it is. I think it's just like an amazing feat, and it's cool that it's possible and that, you're kind of developing your own method of doing it in the process that other people can kind of, learn from too. I think it's amazing.
There's a John Doe here in Atlanta I want to ID so bad.
Let's figure it out.
APD won't give me the file.
Why not?
I don't know. Maybe you should go knock on the door.
I mean, I'll try. But
he was set on fire.
I haven't had that much luck lately with police, but we'll see.
He was set on fire for his wallet.
What?
Someone stole his wallet and set it on fire to steal it in 1996. Horrific. Yeah. And I want that file so bad because I think he can be ID'd.
Why do they want that file? Give it over.
No one's working on it.
No one is working on that case.
Yeah.
I bet my life on it.
Yeah. But they won't let me have it because they're... I think due to certain city tensions, they're not handing over files right now.
Cop City?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not handing over files.
Yeah, they're being a little guarded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would love to work on that case. So.
Okay. Well, maybe they'll give it to us. Maybe we'll poke from some other
angle
reactions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has been so much fun.
It has.
Always been a fan of your work, and can't wait to listen to the Audible version of it.
Yeah, that's what Brooke did.
Hey, like that sounds like a better. Is it you talking?
It is. It's my first audio book.
Wow, yeah. That's pretty cool. Okay, cool. It's not AI?
Some people may think that it is.
Sounds so good.
Yeah, who's this AI? Yeah, But yeah, leave me a 5-star review, Payne.
I will.
We will be friends forever.
I will definitely give you 5 stars.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
And thanks for having me.
Talking to Death is a production of Tenderfoot TV and iHeart Podcasts, created and hosted by Payne Lindsey. For Tenderfoot TV, executive producers are Payne Lindsey and Donald Albright. Co-executive producer is Mike Rooney. For iHeart Podcasts, executive producers are Matt Frederick and Alex Williams, with original music by Makeup and Vanity Set. Additional production by Mike Rooney, Dylan Harrington, Sean Nerney, Dayton Cole, and Gustav Wild for Cogito. Production support by Tracy Kaplan, Mara Davis, and Trevor Young. Mixing and mastering by Cooper Skinner and Dayton Cole. Our cover art was created by Rob Sheridan. Check out our website, talkingtodeathpodcast.com.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Talking to Death. This series is released weekly, absolutely free. But if you want ad-free listening and exclusive bonuses, you can subscribe to Tenderfoot Plus on Apple Podcasts or go to tenderfootplus.com.